Number 1. Rebecca Grossman.
A judge has sentenced socialite Rebecca Grossman to 15 years to life in the hit-and-run crash that killed two young brothers in Westlake Village back in 2020.
It was the evening of September 29th, 2020, in Westlake Village, California. One of those quiet, upscale neighborhoods where families feel safe. On that night were Marcus Kander, 11, and his younger brother, Jacob, just 8 years old. That night, the boys were holding hands while trying to cross the street in a marked crosswalk with their mother nearby. All of a sudden, a white Mercedes-Benz SUV came speeding through, fast, unrelenting, and far above the 45-mile-per-hour limit. It struck the boys with such force that Mark's body flew over 250 feet. Jacob's was thrown nearly 50. The driver behind the wheel was Rebecca Grossman, a well-known socialite, co-founder of a children's burn foundation, often seen at charity events, known for her wealth, her image, her pristine lifestyle. But in a split-second decision that night, driving up to 81 miles per hour, tailing her then-lover and former MLB pitcher, Scott Erickson, and ignoring every instinct of safety, everything changed. Witnesses said they heard her engine roaring down the street. She didn't stop in time. She didn't brake when she should have. And after hitting the boys, she didn't make attempt of slowing down, at least to show a sign of unintentional act. Police would later find that her vehicle only stopped because an automated emergency system kicked in. But by then, it was already too late. At first, she tried to explain it away, said she didn't see the boys, said another car might have hit them, even blamed Erickson, the man she was tailing, but the evidence told a different story. Black box data showed her speed. Surveillance caught her movement. Cell tower pings placed her exactly where the boys were killed. Her story simply didn't hold up. And here's where it gets colder. Investigators discovered she had been under the influence of alcohol and Valium, though her blood alcohol was just under the legal limit. The crash wasn't just an accident. Prosecutors argued it was gross negligence that rose to the level of murder. Throughout the trial, Rebecca never showed the kind of remorse you'd expect from someone who took the lives of two children. In fact, prosecutors accused her of trying to manipulate witnesses, even contact jurors, actions that nearly derailed her case. Her demeanor, entitled, evasive, and defiant, painted the picture of a woman who believed the rules didn't apply to her. On February 23rd, 2024, she was found guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder, 2 counts of vehicular manslaughter, and hit-and-run causing death. So, the judge sentenced her to 15 years to life, plus 3 years for fleeing the scene, served concurrently. In that courtroom, Nancy Iskander, the boy's mother, delivered words that cut straight to the heart of this case. You didn't just kill my children, you tried to erase them with lies. Rebecca Grossman now lives behind bars, a far cry from the luxury she once flaunted. And as of now, she may be eligible for parole in about 9 years, a fact that continues to torment the grieving family she left behind. Number 2. Amy Preasmyer. In 1997, Ricky Cowles Jr. was just 21 years old, working as an electrician and building his life one day at a time. He was the kind of guy who was good with his hands, not just fixing electrical problems, but mending relationships too. He was quiet, hardworking, and genuinely caring. When his 16-year-old girlfriend, Amy Preasmyer, became pregnant, Ricky saw it as the start of something beautiful. To him, they were building a family together. To Amy, apparently, it was something else entirely. On August 12th, Ricky was found unconscious in his Lancaster, California apartment. Someone had beaten him savagely with a claw hammer and then shot him in the head. The injuries were so severe that even though paramedics rushed him to the hospital, he never regained consciousness. 3 days later, he was gone. The person who made that 911 call? Amy herself. The same young woman who was carrying his child. Initially, the case left detectives scratching their heads. There was no sign of forced entry, nothing stolen, and Ricky didn't have enemies. Just a young man, dead in his own home with no apparent motive. The case went cold for 2 years. Then, in 1999, a man named Billy Hoffman started running his mouth. He was bragging to people about killing someone for money, and eventually word got back to police. When they brought Hoffman in, he spilled everything. He told investigators that he'd been hired to kill Ricky Cowles. And the person who paid him? Amy Preasmyer. The plan was more elaborate than anyone had imagined. Amy hadn't worked alone. She'd recruited her friend Jennifer Kellogg and another person who provided the weapon. The motive was as cold as it was simple. Amy didn't want Ricky in her life anymore. She didn't want the responsibility of their relationship or their child. Instead of having a difficult conversation or simply walking away, she chose murder. Here's how it went down. On the night of August 12th, Jennifer drove Hoffman to Ricky's apartment. Amy made sure Ricky would be home and unsuspecting. Hoffman went inside, attacked Ricky with the hammer, then shot him at point-blank range. Amy showed up later, acting like she'd just discovered the scene, complete with tears, trembling, and a frantic call to 911. For years, her performance worked. She grieved publicly, played the role of the devastated girlfriend. No one suspected a thing. But Hoffman eventually decided to come clean. In court, he testified that Amy had promised him thousands of dollars to carry out the murder. In 2002, more than 5 years after Ricky's death, the truth finally came out. Amy was arrested in 2005 and went to trial in 2007. Prosecutors built their case using Hoffman's testimony, secretly recorded jail conversations, and even statements Amy made during interrogations when she didn't realize she was being recorded. During the trial, Amy remained largely emotionless. But those secret recordings told a different story. In one conversation with Jennifer, she was caught saying, "If Hoffman doesn't testify, they don't have a fucking case against me." In 2008, the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and solicitation to commit murder. She was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. But here's the most heartbreaking part. That child she was carrying, Ricky's child, grew up without a father. Not because of an accident or illness, but because his own mother orchestrated his father's murder before he was even born. Today, Amy Preasmyer is serving her sentence at Central California Women's Facility. Despite the life sentence, she has a parole hearing scheduled for November 2025. Though, given the nature of her crimes, release seems unlikely. For Ricky's family, this case represents the ultimate betrayal. It's not just about a young man losing his life. It's about trust, manipulation, and the cold calculation it takes to have someone killed rather than simply walking away. And somewhere out there is a child who may never fully understand why he grew up without his father, unless he one day decides to uncover the truth himself. Number 3. Leslie Van Houten.
I was an empty shell of a person that was filled up with Manson
She was
rhetoric.
just 19 years old when she walked into the LaBianca home with a knife in her hand and the voice of Charles Manson echoing in her mind. That night, the world saw a smiling, soft-spoken teenage girl transform into something unrecognizable. Leslie Van Houten was, once a high school cheerleader, but now forever remembered as one of the women who helped murder a married couple in their own home. The year was 1969, in Los Angeles. Just one night earlier, Manson's so-called family had slaughtered pregnant actress Sharon Tate and 4 others. Now, the cult wanted more chaos, more blood, more fear. The next night, Manson chose Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, 2 hard-working, kind people who ran a small supermarket and lived quietly in Los Feliz. They didn't know their names had been pulled from thin air. They didn't know strangers were watching their house. Van Houten, along with Tex Watson and Patricia Krenwinkel, entered the home under Manson's command. Leno was tied up in the living room. Rosemary was dragged into the bedroom. And Leslie, this teenager who, months earlier, had been living a normal suburban life, stabbed Rosemary repeatedly, 14 times. She would later claim Rosemary was already dead. But the autopsy said otherwise. The murders were brutal, ritualistic, utterly senseless. Manson believed the killings would help ignite a race war he called Helter Skelter, and Leslie believed him. High on drugs, deep in delusion, and lost in loyalty, she went along with it. She was arrested weeks later. At trial, she laughed, sang songs with the other girls, carved an X into her forehead to match Manson. America watched in horror, unable to reconcile the smiling face of a young girl with the vicious crime she had helped carry out.
I seemed to want more living out of life than what was expected of young girls at that time.
She was sentenced to death in 1971, but when California struck down the death penalty, that sentence was commuted to life in prison. And that's where Leslie stayed, for more than 5 decades. But over time, something changed. She got clean, got an education, became a model inmate, tutored other prisoners, took therapy seriously, and began to express what some believed was real, lasting remorse. At parole hearings, she didn't shift blame. She owned her actions. "I was a coward," she said at one hearing. "I was weak. I allowed myself to be manipulated, and people died because of it." Still, no matter how much she changed, governors kept saying no. The crime was just too severe. Until July 11th, 2023. After more than 53 years, Leslie Van Houten walked out of prison on parole. She became the first Manson family member ever to be released. Today, she's living in transitional housing under close supervision. She's in her 70s now, grey-haired, quiet. Nothing like the girl she once was, but for many, that's not enough. Deborah Tate, whose pregnant sister Sharon was murdered just one night before the LaBiancas, said it best. "She may look like a grandmother now, but I still see the girl with the knife." The question that lingers is this: can someone who did something that monstrous at 19 ever truly be forgiven at 73? Because some believe in redemption. Others live with the scars. Number 4. Monica Sementilli.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Monica Sementilli, guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony as charged in Count 1 of the indictment.
On January 23, 2017, a 49-year-old man was found brutally stabbed on his back patio. His name was Fabio Sementilli, a celebrity hairstylist who had built his reputation styling some of Hollywood's biggest names. He was a devoted husband, a loving father, and someone who genuinely cared about lifting others up, both professionally and personally. What he didn't realize was that the greatest threat to his life was sleeping right next to him every night. It was supposed to be just another ordinary afternoon. Fabio was doing what he loved, relaxing on his patio, watching TV in the California sunshine. Then, all of a sudden, he was ambushed and stabbed 7 times. His throat was slashed, major arteries severed, left to die on the patio of the home where he'd raised his family. When police first arrived, it looked like a burglary gone wrong. But experienced detectives know that when something seems too obvious, it usually is. There were no signs of forced entry into the house. More suspicious still, investigators discovered that the home's security footage had been deliberately deleted. Someone with access to the system had wiped it clean. That's when police started looking closer to home. What they found was a web of lies, betrayal, and cold calculation. At the center of it all was Fabio's wife, Monica Sementilli. Monica had been living 2 completely different lives. On the surface, she was the perfect suburban wife and mother. But behind closed doors, she was having an affair with Robert Baker, a former adult film actor who had a history of violence and criminal behavior. Together, they had hatched a plan that was as simple as it was ruthless: kill Fabio and collect on his $1.6 million life insurance policy. According to prosecutors, Monica's role was crucial. She left the door unlocked that day, knowing exactly what would happen next. Baker arrived, but he didn't come alone. He brought Christopher Austin to help carry out the murder. Hours later, after they were gone, Monica called 911. She played her part perfectly, the shocked, grieving widow who had just discovered her husband's body. But investigators were already connecting the dots. DNA at the scene, cell phone records placing the killers near the house, the deleted surveillance footage, text messages between the conspirators. Everything pointed directly back to Monica and her lover. The case broke wide open when Christopher Austin decided to cooperate with police. He confessed to everything, detailing how Monica had orchestrated the entire plan. She had asked Baker to kill her husband, been involved in the planning, and her motive was crystal clear. She wanted Fabio gone so she could live freely with Baker and cash in on the insurance money. At trial, prosecutors described it perfectly: a cold and calculated crime driven by greed, lust, and betrayal. Monica sat in that courtroom, showing almost no emotion as the evidence mounted against her. Even when her own daughter, Isabella, stood up and told the people who destroyed her family, "You ruined our lives," Monica remained stone-faced. Robert Baker accepted a plea deal in 2023, life without the possibility of parole. Christopher Austin received the same sentence. And in April 2025, after a 10-week trial, Monica Sementilli was found guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances and conspiracy to commit murder. Her sentencing is set for June 23, 2025, but the outcome is already decided. Life in prison with no chance of parole. The tragedy here goes beyond just another murder case. Fabio had built something beautiful. A successful career, a loving home, a reputation for kindness and generosity. By all accounts, he was loyal to his wife and devoted to his family. In the end, the person he trusted most in the world was the one planning his death. That kind of betrayal leaves scars that no prison sentence can ever heal. Number 5. Kristin Rossum. On the surface, Kristin Rossum seemed to have everything going for her. At just 24 years old, she was working as a toxicologist with the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office, a prestigious position that required serious education and skill. She was married to Greg DeVille, a man who genuinely loved her and treated her well. They had a comfortable apartment, stable careers, and what looked like a bright future together. But appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes the most perfect-looking lives are covering up the deepest problems. On November 6, 2000, Kristin made a frantic 911 call. She told dispatchers that her husband had taken his own life with a deadly combination of prescription medications. When paramedics arrived at their apartment, they found Greg lying motionless on the bed. But there was something unusual about the scene. Red rose petals were scattered carefully across the sheets around his body. It was a detail that immediately struck investigators as odd. The whole scene felt too deliberate, too theatrical. This wasn't how most suicides look, and experienced investigators know to trust their instinct when something doesn't feel right. Initially, Kristin stuck to her story. She told police that Greg had been struggling with depression and had overdosed on prescription drugs. She painted herself as a devastated wife who had simply discovered her husband's body. But as detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a very different story. Kristin wasn't the grieving widow she appeared to be. She was having an affair with her supervisor, Dr. Michael Robertson. She was also secretly using methamphetamine, a drug she had battled with before, but had apparently relapsed with. When Greg discovered both of these secrets, he confronted her about them. He threatened to expose her drug use to her employer and her family, which would have destroyed both her career and her reputation. That confrontation changed everything. Here's what made Kristin particularly dangerous. As a toxicologist, she knew exactly how different drugs work and what combinations could be lethal. More importantly, she had access to substances that most people never encounter, including fentanyl, a synthetic opioid that's incredibly potent and can be fatal in tiny amounts. According to prosecutors, Kristin stole fentanyl from her workplace laboratory. She then mixed it with other sedatives like clonazepam and oxycodone, creating a lethal cocktail that she administered to Greg while he was in bed. The rose petals scattered around his body weren't a romantic gesture. They were part of an elaborate staging designed to make the murder look like something else entirely. Her plan might have worked if she hadn't left so much evidence behind. Investigators found a needle mark on Greg's body that couldn't be explained by any medical intervention. They discovered that fentanyl vials were missing from Kristin's workplace. Perhaps most damning, they found a store receipt showing that Kristin had purchased a single red rose on the same day Greg died, proving that the rose petals weren't already in the house, but were deliberately placed there as part of her cover-up. At trial, Kristin's defense team argued that Greg had taken his own life, but the toxicology evidence told a different story. The amount of fentanyl in Greg's system was lethal, and the combination of drugs wasn't consistent with a typical suicide. It was consistent with a calculated poisoning carried out by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. In 2002, the jury found Kristin Rossum guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances, specifically murder by poison. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Today, she's serving that sentence at Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. All of her appeals have been unsuccessful, and a civil court later awarded $10 million to Greg's family. But no amount of money can bring back what was lost. Greg DeVille was only 29 years old when he died. He was a man who believed in his marriage and trusted his wife completely. When he discovered her secrets, he didn't immediately leave. He tried to work things out. Instead of honesty, or even a difficult conversation about ending their marriage, Kristin chose murder. Number 6. Angelina Rodriguez. This case shares some disturbing similarities with Kristin Rossum's story, another woman who used her position of trust to commit murder for personal gain. It was September 9th, 2000 in Montebello, California. Jose Frank Rodriguez, a 41-year-old special education teacher, was found dead in his home. There were no signs of forced entry, no visible injuries, nothing that immediately suggested foul play. His wife of just 4 months, Angelina, told authorities that he had simply collapsed without warning. On the surface, it looked like one of those tragic, unexplained deaths that sometimes happen to seemingly healthy people. Maybe a heart attack, maybe a stroke, something sudden and unpreventable. But investigators have learned to look beyond the obvious, especially when the circumstances don't quite add up. The question started almost immediately. Why would a healthy 41-year-old man die so suddenly? And why was his newlywed wife already inquiring about life insurance payouts just days after the funeral? That's when the investigation took a much darker turn. It turned out that Angelina had convinced Frank to take out a substantial life insurance policy, $250,000 with her as the sole beneficiary. The timing was suspicious. The policy was relatively new when Frank died, and Angelina seemed unusually eager to collect on it. Initially, the medical examiner couldn't determine a clear cause of death. But months later, more thorough testing revealed the truth. Frank had been poisoned. Investigators found traces of ethylene glycol, antifreeze, in his system. They also discovered evidence of oleander exposure, a highly toxic plant that can be fatal if ingested. Someone had been systematically poisoning Frank, likely by contaminating his food and drinks over time. And the person with the most access to what he ate and drank was his wife. The investigation revealed that Angelina had apparently tried multiple methods to kill her husband. Prosecutors alleged that she had first tampered with gas lines in their garage, possibly hoping to cause an explosion. When that didn't work, she turned to more subtle methods, slowly poisoning his beverages and food with deadly substances. Her motive was straightforward: financial gain. This wasn't a crime of passion or the result of an abusive relationship. It was calculated murder for money. But the story gets even more disturbing when you look at Angelina's history. In 1993, 7 years before Frank's death, Angelina's 13-month-old daughter, Alicia, had died under circumstances that were never fully explained. The official report attributed the death to an accident involving a pacifier, and no charges were filed at the time. However, when investigators began looking into Frank's murder, they noticed a troubling pattern. A child's death followed by an insurance claim. Then a new husband's death followed by another insurance policy. This wasn't a series of tragic coincidences. It was a pattern of deliberate acts. During the trial, witnesses testified that she had even attempted to frame someone else for Frank's murder, to deflect suspicion from herself. In 2003, the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances, specifically murder for financial gain and murder by poison. She was sentenced to death in 2004, making her one of the relatively few women on California's death row. The judge's words at sentencing were particularly harsh. "In the past 20 years, I have never seen a colder heart." However, the legal system rarely moves quickly in death penalty cases. After years of appeals and legal challenges, Angelina's sentence was reduced to life without parole in 2024. While the evidence against her remained overwhelming, procedural issues with her original trial ultimately led to the death penalty being taken off the table. Today, Angelina Rodriguez is serving her life sentence at Central California Women's Facility, the same prison where Kristin Rossum is housed. The betrayal in these cases goes beyond just the murder itself. It's the violation of the most fundamental trust between spouses, the promise to love and protect each other, that becomes twisted into something deadly. Number 7. Kelsey Turner. Some stories just sting a little deeper, because behind the violence is a relationship built on trust. On the surface, it looked like generosity. Underneath, it was manipulation and betrayal. This is the story of Kelsey Turner, a former Playboy and Maxim model who had built her entire lifestyle around maintaining appearances. Her Instagram was filled with perfect photos, designer outfits, and luxury settings. She lived in upscale apartments and drove expensive cars. But none of this lifestyle was actually sustainable on her own income. For several years, Turner's lavish lifestyle was being funded by Dr. Thomas Kirk Burchard, a 71-year-old psychiatrist from California. He was more than twice her age, and over time, He had spent over $300,000 supporting her, paying her rent, buying her cars, covering her bills and expenses. To him, he was helping a young woman get on her feet. Turner called him her mentor, and he seemed to genuinely believe he was making a positive difference in her life. It was March 1st, when Burchard traveled to Las Vegas to confront Kelsey. He had discovered some financial irregularities, forged checks and missing money, and he had decided it was time to end their arrangement. He was planning to cut off the financial support that had been keeping her afloat. That confrontation would be Dr. Burchard's last. A week later, his body was discovered in the trunk of Turner's blue Mercedes, abandoned in the Nevada desert near Lake Mead. He had been wrapped in blankets, but the condition of his body told a horrific story. He had been beaten to death with a baseball bat, his head crushed and his face rendered unrecognizable. The crime scene wasn't a mystery for long. The investigation moved quickly once police examined the Las Vegas home that Turner shared with her boyfriend, John Kennison, and their roommate, Diana Pena. The evidence was overwhelming. Blood throughout the house, broken furniture, cleaning supplies, and towels that matched those used to wrap Dr. Burchard's body. Then came the most chilling detail from Pena. She told investigators that Kelsey had snapped when Burchard said he was pulling the plug. He was going to take it all away, Pena said. She wasn't going to let that happen. She described how Turner had watched as Kennison attacked the elderly doctor. When Pena tried to intervene and wanted to call for help, Turner refused to let her call 911. Instead of trying to save Dr. Burchard's life, Turner participated in covering up the crime. She helped clean up the scene, and later assisted in moving his body to the car trunk where it was abandoned. The plan was sloppy, but the motive was clear. Turner was willing to commit murder rather than lose her source of financial support. Turner was arrested. Kennison confessed. Pena also cooperated. And in 2022, Turner entered what's called an Alford plea, a legal mechanism that allows a defendant to maintain their innocence while acknowledging that prosecutors have sufficient evidence to secure a conviction. The court sentenced her to 10 to 25 years in prison, and she'll be eligible for parole in 2029. If this story stayed with you, if it made you pause, then don't let it disappear into the scroll. Share it, because someone out there needs to see it. Like it, if the truth matters to you. And subscribe, so you don't miss the stories that still need to be told. This isn't entertainment, it's real, and remembering, that's the least we can do.